Grandmother accused of her grandson's disappearance, but his whereabouts shocked everyone. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. The clock struck 7 in the morning, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee had already filled the small kitchen of Donna Teresa's house. The sound of the spoon stirring the hot liquid was the only noise breaking the silence. It was her routine, an almost sacred ritual that, for the past 3 years, had been her anchor in facing lonely days. Since losing Amanda, her only daughter, her life had become a mixture of silence and longing. Miguel, her grandson, was her only companion, the bright spot in a life marked by tragedy. Miguel rushed into the kitchen, his backpack hanging off one shoulder and his sneakers still untied. "Grandma, I'm going to be late. The bus must be coming already," he said, grabbing a slice of bread. Teresa looked at him with a restrained smile. "Calm down, boy, or you'll end up forgetting something. Did you grab your jacket? It's cold today." Miguel shrugged and answered with a quick, "Yes, Grandma," before darting out the door with a hurried wave. Teresa stood by the window, watching until he was out of sight. There was something unsettling about that morning, a heaviness in the air she couldn't explain. She decided to push the thoughts aside, busying herself with the household chores. While cleaning Miguel's room, she noticed a small notebook partially hidden under the bed, but chose not to touch it. She respected his privacy, even if curiosity sometimes tempted her. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Teresa grew increasingly uneasy about Miguel's absence. He usually came home shortly after 5. By 6, worry settled in her stomach like a stone. She called the school, but the response was vague. "The students have already left." Teresa felt panic rising, her hands trembling as she dialed the police. The response was procedural, as though her anguish was just another task in the routine of a regular day. "Ma'am, we'll file a missing person report, but it's possible the boy went somewhere without telling you. This happens all the time." Teresa tried to argue, to explain that Miguel wasn't like that, but the officer's tone remained detached. When she hung up the phone, despair began to take hold. Miguel wasn't like other kids. He was careful, responsible. Something was wrong. Returning to his room, searching for any clue as to where he might have gone, her eyes fell once more on the notebook she had noticed earlier. This time she picked it up without hesitation. It was a diary, filled with Miguel's neat handwriting. The first entries were about school, classmates, trivial matters for a 12-year-old boy. But as she read on, the tone of the entries shifted. "Today I met my friend at the park again. He said he's going to help me, but I have to keep it a secret. Grandma can't know." Teresa's heart nearly stopped. Who was this friend? And why did Miguel think she couldn't know about him? The following pages were even more cryptic, mentioning meetings in places she didn't recognize, along with small sketches that looked like maps or pathways. One of them pointed to a location near the school. Teresa sat on the bed, clutching the diary as if it were made of fragile glass. Tears began to stream down her face, but she wiped them away with resolve. Miguel was in danger. She knew it now. It didn't matter who this mysterious friend was, or what promises they had made to the boy. What mattered was that Teresa would do everything to bring him back. Night fell, but Teresa couldn't sleep. She spent hours rereading the diary, looking for patterns, trying to decipher the messages Miguel had left. The silence of the house felt more oppressive than ever. Outside, the street was dark, lit only by flickering streetlights. For the first time in a long while, Teresa felt truly alone. But she also felt something else, a fierce determination. Losing Amanda had been a blow that had almost destroyed her. She wouldn't lose Miguel too. Tomorrow, with or without help, she would begin her search. The next morning brought a biting cold that seemed to pierce the skin. Donna Teresa had barely slept, and her head still throbbed with the enigmatic messages in Miguel's diary. As she stepped out to gather information at the school, she felt the weight of the neighborhood's stares on her. "Did you hear?" murmured a woman leaning against a gate. First, the daughter, now the grandson. Strange, isn't it? The words struck her like daggers, but Teresa pressed on, keeping her head held high. At the school, the hallways were still empty, except for the principal, a middle-aged woman with small glasses and a rigid posture. Teresa tried to keep calm as she asked her questions. "My grandson disappeared after leaving here yesterday. Do you have cameras? Any idea where he might have gone?" The principal sighed, adjusting her glasses on her face. "Donna Teresa, we're very sorry for what's happening, but Miguel didn't seem to be in any danger. He left at the usual time. Maybe he went to meet friends." Teresa wasn't satisfied. "What friends? He never mentioned anyone besides his classmates. You have to help find my grandson." The principal avoided her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll check the cameras. If I find anything, I'll let you know." Teresa left the school with a heavy heart and no solid leads. As she walked through the streets, rumors grew like weeds around her. People whispered as she passed, their voices low but impossible to ignore. "Maybe she's to blame, you know. Family stories can be complicated." Poor boy, living alone with an old lady like that. Teresa felt her face burn with indignation, but ignored the comments. She didn't have time to deal with people's malice. Back at home, she dove once more into Miguel's diary. The following pages revealed painful confessions. "School isn't easy. They call me names, throw things at me. But he said he can protect me. I just need to trust him." The words were a silent cry for help. Miguel had been dealing with bullying, something he had never mentioned. Teresa felt a crushing wave of guilt. How had she not noticed? Why had he hidden it from her? One particular entry caught her attention. "He said he knows where I can be safe, on the back street, near the playground. But it's a secret." Teresa recognized the place. It was a dimly lit alley known for attracting troubled youth. The thought of Miguel being in such a place filled her with dread, but she knew she had to go there. As night fell, Teresa put on a heavy coat, pinned her white hair into a firm bun, and left the house. The street was deserted, except for the occasional sound of a distant car. When she arrived at the location mentioned in the diary, she found only trash cans and graffiti on the walls. It looked abandoned, but there were small, recent footprints on the ground. She searched the area but found only a small, folded piece of paper among the debris. With trembling hands, she opened it. It read, "Trust comes at a price. He will understand." The note had no signature, but its meaning was clear. Miguel had been drawn into something far more dangerous than she had imagined. On her way home, Teresa felt the weight of the situation grow heavier. Miguel wasn't just running away or hiding. He had been lured into something perilous, and now she faced an additional layer of fear, the possibility that the people around her, the ones whispering and judging, might hinder her search. Back in the empty house, she stared at the diary on the table. The guilt still gnawed at her, but something else was growing inside her, an unshakable determination. Miguel wasn't alone, even if he thought he was. Teresa would find her grandson, no matter what she had to face. The clock was nearing 10 at night when Teresa left her house once more. The note found in the alley lingered in her mind. Who could have left such a message? And what did "trust comes at a price" mean? With a small flashlight in her pocket and Miguel's diary firmly in her hands, she decided to follow the places mentioned in the entries. Her intuition guided her through the darkness, while the silence of the streets seemed to conceal untold secrets. She walked to the playground mentioned in one of the pages. By day, it was a place where children played, but at night, the scene transformed. The area was deserted, the rusty swings creaking in the wind. Teresa searched the surroundings, her eyes sharp for any detail. That was when she noticed marks on the ground, as if something had been dragged recently. Her heart raced, but following the trail led her to a wall covered in graffiti. There was nothing more to see. "I need to be smarter than them," she muttered to herself as she opened the diary again. Another clue stood out. The name of a street scribbled near the playground. It was an alley that led to an abandoned warehouse, a place known in the neighborhood as a hangout for troubled teens. Even as fear gripped her at the thought of what she might find, Teresa tightened her coat and headed toward the alley. The stench of accumulated trash and the echo of distant footsteps made the environment even more threatening. When she reached the warehouse, she found clear signs that the place was frequently used. Empty drink cans, food scraps, and burn marks on the ground indicated regular gatherings. She heard muffled laughter from inside. Summoning all her courage, she hid behind a stack of boxes and waited. The laughter grew louder, followed by the voices of young men talking. "The kid was smart, but I didn't think he'd be this much trouble. He'll learn the hard way," said a deep voice. Teresa tried to peek discreetly. Two boys were sitting near an improvised fire. They seemed like teenagers, but their tone carried a dark undertone. One of them held a shiny object that looked like a chain, while the other fiddled with a cell phone. "What if someone comes looking for him?" asked the boy with the phone. The other shrugged. "No one's coming. Who cares about him? Besides, he knew what he was getting into." Teresa held her breath. They were talking about Miguel. Her instinct urged her to confront them and demand answers, but she knew she needed more information before making a move. She stayed silent until the two boys left the warehouse, leaving only the fire dying slowly. Once the place was empty, Teresa ventured inside. She searched every corner, her flashlight illuminating stacks of boxes, pieces of wood, and discarded items. In the middle of the mess, she found something that made her freeze: Miguel's backpack. It was torn, dirty, but unmistakable. Teresa held the bag close to her chest, feeling a mix of relief at finding a trace of him and despair at still not knowing his whereabouts. Inside the backpack, she found a folded piece of paper. It was another note, this time clearly handwritten in clumsy letters. "Go home. He doesn't want you to get involved." There was no signature, but Teresa knew it was a direct threat. Someone knew she was searching for Miguel and didn't like it. She left the warehouse quickly, glancing over her shoulder constantly. She felt as though she were being watched, as if invisible eyes were tracking her every move. The walk back home was long, and every sound in the darkness made her heart race. Upon arriving, she locked the door and sat at the table, spreading out all the notes and clues she had so far. As she stared at the diary, the backpack, and the messages, she realized she couldn't face this alone. She would need help. But who would be willing to believe her? The police didn't care, and the neighbors only knew how to judge. Then she remembered Davi, the retired teacher who lived on her street. He had always been kind and helpful, someone who seemed to genuinely empathize with others. Perhaps he could be the key to advancing her search for Miguel. With her body exhausted and her mind restless, Teresa resolved to seek Davi's help the next morning. Meanwhile, she held Miguel's diary close to her chest and made a silent promise. No matter what happened, she would find her grandson, and she would uncover the truth. Dawn brought a cold wind that made the trees on the street sway, scattering dry leaves across the ground. Teresa had barely slept, her mind still racing with the enigmatic words from Miguel's diary and the threatening notes. As the sun rose, she knew she couldn't delay any longer. She needed help. Davi, the retired teacher, lived 2 houses down. He was a discreet man, always seen tending to his garden or reading on his porch. Teresa didn't know him well, but his reputation as a fair and intelligent person was well established. With firm steps but a hesitant heart, she walked to his house and rang the doorbell. Davy opened the door with a friendly smile, though Teresa's worried expression made him furrow his brow. "Donna Teresa, what a surprise. Is everything all right?" He had a way of seeing beyond appearances, and the exhaustion in her eyes was unmistakable. "I need your help, Davy," she said, clutching Miguel's diary with trembling hands. "My grandson is missing, and no one seems to care. Only you can help me." Davy stepped aside to let her in, gesturing toward the sofa in his living room, which was scattered with books and newspapers. Teresa explained everything: the disappearance, the diary, the notes, and the warehouse. As she spoke, Davy listened intently, his face growing more serious. When she finished, he was silent for a few moments, deep in thought. "This is serious, Donna Teresa, very serious, but what you're doing is brave. We can't rely on the authorities for this, at least not yet. I'll help you." His words were simple, but carried a weight that gave Teresa newfound hope. Davy began by analyzing Miguel's diary, reading through the entries while asking questions about the boy's personality and habits. Was he reserved? Many of these phrases suggest he didn't trust people easily. Teresa nodded. "He was always shy, but after my daughter, after everything, he became more withdrawn. He never wanted to worry me." "He was clearly hiding this to protect you," Davy said, pointing to one entry. "These meetings he mentions seem carefully planned, and he refers to this friend almost reverently. I think we need to find out who this friend is." As Davy pondered, Teresa pulled Miguel's backpack and the threatening notes from her bag. Examining the items, Davy noticed a detail she had missed. The paper from the most recent note had a watermark of a logo. "This looks like it came from a notepad used at an establishment, somewhere nearby, perhaps." He suggested they start by searching for places that might use such paper. Before leaving, Davy opened a drawer and pulled out a flashlight, a notebook, and a pocket knife. "Just in case," he said, noticing Teresa's doubtful look. "We don't know what we're dealing with." They walked through the neighborhood, Teresa holding the diary, while Davy carefully observed their surroundings. Along the way, he helped her piece together what might have happened to Miguel, analyzing patterns in the diary and clues from the note. They stopped at a corner store to ask about the paper. The attendant recognized the watermark as belonging to a cafe nearby on the other side of the neighborhood. When they reached the cafe, they found it bustling with young patrons. Several tables were occupied by teenagers, some of whom gave suspicious looks as Teresa and Davy entered. They approached the counter, where the barista greeted them with a polite smile. "How can I help you?" Davy showed the note and asked if the paper came from there. The barista quickly confirmed. "Yes, that's the paper we use here. Is something wrong?" Teresa's heart raced. "My grandson is missing, and we found this note in a warehouse. Has he been here before?" The barista hesitated, as though reluctant to get involved, but then met Teresa's desperate gaze. "I've seen a boy here, blonde, kind of thin. He used to come in with 2 other kids. They didn't seem like the well-behaved type, if you know what I mean." "Do you know where they went afterward?" Davy asked, jotting down notes. The barista thought for a moment before replying. "They mentioned a place near the railroad tracks. I think that's their hangout." With this new lead, Teresa and Davy returned home, already planning their next steps. They now had a direction, the area near the railroad tracks, but they also had more questions than answers. Who were these boys? What was Miguel doing with them? And most importantly, where was he now? Teresa knew the journey was just beginning, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Davy was by her side, and that gave her the strength to keep going. The railway seemed like a scene from a forgotten movie, with rusted tracks and an unsettling silence that hung over the area. Teresa and Davi arrived at the location late in the afternoon as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange. Next to the tracks stood an abandoned warehouse with peeling walls and broken windows, surrounded by trash and overgrown weeds. It was a place that exuded abandonment, but also mystery. Teresa hesitated for a moment, staring at the imposing structure in front of her. Sensing her unease, Davi gently touched her shoulder. "We're in this together. Let's take it slow." With a flashlight in hand, he led the way to one of the doors, which was slightly ajar and creaked softly as it was pushed open. The interior was even darker, with narrow hallways and debris scattered across the floor. The dim beam of the flashlight revealed graffiti on the walls and markings on the ground, suggesting that the place was frequented by others. Teresa clutched Miguel's diary as if it were a compass, while Davi mentally noted every detail, ready for anything. At the back of the warehouse, they found a room that appeared to be a gathering spot. There were old mattresses, food wrappers, and a small pile of seemingly abandoned objects. Among the clutter, Teresa spotted something that made her heart race. A small wooden box with Miguel's name engraved on the lid. She picked it up with trembling hands, opening it slowly. Inside were a few photos, folded papers, and a silver chain she immediately recognized. It belonged to Amanda, her daughter, and Miguel had always worn it as a keepsake. Teresa gripped the chain tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "He was here," she whispered. Davi carefully examined the papers. They were a mix of confusing notes, some appearing to be codes or rudimentary maps. One sheet had a sequence of numbers and letters, C7, A12, D4. Next to it was a chilling phrase, "Don't trust anyone, not even the friend." The words sent a shiver down Teresa's spine. Was Miguel leaving messages for someone else, or was this a warning to himself? As they studied the items, the sound of footsteps came from outside. Davi quickly turned off the flashlight, and they hid behind a stack of boxes. Two young men entered, talking loudly. One had a shaved head and carried a backpack, while the other, taller and more animated, gestured angrily. "I told you it was risky. Now she's snooping around everywhere. That old lady's more trouble than we thought," said the taller one. The other replied with a mocking tone, "She won't last. People who poke their noses where they shouldn't always pay the price." Teresa held her breath, fear tightening her chest. Davy motioned for her to stay quiet as the young men continued their conversation. "What about the boy?" asked the one with the shaved head. "He'll do what he's told. He doesn't have a choice. They already said they don't want more problems. And who knows, maybe this will teach her a lesson." The two left soon after, oblivious to Teresa and Davi's presence. Once silence returned, they emerged from their hiding place, exchanging tense glances. "Miguel is being manipulated," said Davi. "But by whom, and for what purpose?" Teresa clutched Amanda's chain to her chest. "I won't leave him in the hands of these people, no matter who they are." There was a fierce determination in her voice that Davi hadn't seen before, and it only strengthened his resolve. As they left the warehouse, Davi suggested taking the notes to decipher the codes. "This could lead us to where they've taken Miguel, and those words, 'Don't trust the friend,' are troubling." He knew he was in danger. Back at home, Teresa spread the papers out on the table, while Davi took photos of the codes and numbers. Miguel's wooden box now sat beside his diary, a symbol of the battle she was waging. They knew they had to act quickly. Every minute seemed to peel back new layers of mystery, but it also brought them closer to finding Miguel. That night, as Teresa tried to rest, a new resolve took root within her. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but she was prepared to follow every clue to the very end. Nothing else mattered. Miguel was her life, and she would do whatever it took to bring him back. The day began under a thick fog. wrapping the city in a grey shroud that seemed to mirror Teresa's state of mind. At the kitchen table, she and Davi pored over the papers found in the warehouse. The code, C7A12D4, appeared to be a sequence, but its meaning remained elusive. Teresa drummed her fingers impatiently on the table. This could reference coordinates or maybe a coded location. It's not something Miguel would have come up with alone. Someone guided him in this, Davi mused, studying the rudimentary maps sketched in the diary. Before they could dive deeper, a sharp knock echoed from the door. Teresa answered to find a rough-looking man in worn clothes and a cap. Without a word, he handed her an envelope and disappeared before she could ask anything. Inside was a note, the words spelled out with cut-out magazine letters. "Stop looking, he's safe. Your curiosity could cost you dearly." The threat only steeled Teresa's resolve. "They think they can scare me. They're wrong," she said firmly. Davy nodded. "This confirms we're onto something. They're starting to panic." Teresa suggested they return to the cafe where they'd found their first clue. Once there, they discreetly asked about the group of teens who frequented the place. Most patrons avoided their questions, but one waitress, visibly uneasy, finally relented. "Look, I don't know much, but those boys aren't trustworthy, always talking about jobs and meeting shady people. I heard something about a warehouse in the industrial zone. Maybe they hang out there." Armed with this new lead, Teresa and Davi decided to investigate. The industrial zone was notorious for its abandoned warehouses and its growing reputation as a hub for illicit activity. Upon arrival, they found the warehouse the waitress had mentioned. Surrounded by rusty gates, the site bustled with activity, trucks unloading crates while men moved quickly with purpose. "This isn't just a hangout for troubled teens," Davi observed. "It's an organized operation." Teresa remained silent, her eyes fixed on the warehouse. "And Miguel is caught in the middle of it. We'll figure out a way in." They waited until nightfall, when the activity dwindled. Sneaking through a side gate, they moved carefully between stacks of crates and pallets. Teresa's heart pounded in her chest, but the thought of finding Miguel overpowered her fear. Inside, they discovered something startling: stacks of high-tech electronics, likely stolen, and folders containing documents detailing routes and names. As they searched, the sound of approaching voices made them freeze. Quickly, they hid behind a pile of boxes, peeking out as two men entered the room. One had a scar across his face, and the other clutched a phone. "The kid, he's quiet just like they wanted," the scarred man said. "But if that woman keeps digging, things could get messy. We need to act fast." Davi motioned for Teresa to stay quiet. They had heard enough to confirm Miguel was being held by this group. Once the men left, Teresa spotted a list of names in one of the folders. One name stood out: Miguel Tavares. Beside it was a number and a date. "It's him," she whispered. Before they could escape, one of the men unexpectedly returned. "Hey, who's there?" Teresa and Davi froze, but the man spotted movement and began shouting, "Intruders!" Without hesitation, Davi grabbed Teresa's hand and they bolted for the exit, dodging obstacles as shouts echoed through the warehouse. Outside, they managed to evade their pursuers, stopping in a deserted street to catch their breath. "That was too close," Davi said, glancing at Teresa. "But now we know for sure Miguel is involved in this operation." Back at Teresa's house, they reviewed everything they had found. The list of names and routes pointed to a criminal network far larger than they'd imagined. Miguel was being used, possibly coerced, and time was running out. "We have to act quickly," Teresa said, her voice steady with determination. "No matter the danger. I will bring my grandson back." Davi agreed. "Tomorrow, we'll dig deeper into this list. It might lead us straight to Miguel." The tension in the room was heavy, but there was also a glimmer of hope. For the first time, Teresa felt she was closer to saving her grandson. The next morning, Teresa and Davi began piecing together the puzzle. The list of names they had found in the warehouse was long, many of them seeming to be code names or nicknames. But next to each name were dates and locations that suggested meetings or transactions. Miguel's name stood out, marked with the most recent date and the address of a building in the city center. Davi researched the location and discovered that the building had been abandoned for years, but was recently rumored to host clandestine meetings. If he was at the warehouse yesterday, maybe they've moved Miguel there. We need to investigate, Davi suggested. Teresa agreed, despite her growing fear. Before leaving, Teresa revisited Miguel's diary, searching for answers she might have missed. One particular entry caught her eye. I just wanted her to know I'm not weak, that I can protect us both. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Miguel believed he needed to take care of her, hiding his own fears and problems. Guilt and sadness washed over her, but they also gave her strength. He did this because he loves me, and I won't fail him, she said, more to herself than to Davi. The building in the city center was a dilapidated structure, its broken windows and weather-stained walls bearing the marks of time. When they arrived, Teresa and Davi decided to split up. She would keep watch outside while Davi went in to explore. If anything goes wrong, let me know immediately, she said, gripping his arm. Davi entered cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the dark corridor. The interior was littered with debris, but there were clear signs of recent activity, boot prints on the floor and scattered food wrappers. Climbing the stairs, he found a room filled with papers, including more maps and lists of items. In one corner, he spotted a backpack that looked like Miguel's, but there was no sign of the boy. Meanwhile, outside, Teresa noticed a figure approaching. It was a teenager, about 16 years old, with a wary expression. He seemed nervous, glancing around as if to check if he was being followed. Teresa recognized him from descriptions she'd heard at the cafe. He was one of the boys who hung out with Miguel. Summoning her courage, she approached him. "You know my grandson, Miguel. Please, I need your help to find him." The boy hesitated, but something in her voice disarmed him. I can't say much. They're watching me too. But he tried to protect you. They used him because they knew he'd do anything to keep you safe. Who are they? Where is he now? Teresa pressed, but the boy started to back away. I've said too much already. They don't forgive betrayal. Just don't trust anyone here. Before she could ask more, he disappeared around the corner. Shortly after, Davi emerged from the building with a grave expression. I didn't find Miguel, but I found more clues. It seems there's another meeting spot, something they call the base. It's marked as being outside the city, in a rural area. That might be our next lead. Back at the house, Teresa began connecting the dots. Each clue revealed more about what Miguel was facing. He was caught in a web of emotional manipulation and physical threats, likely believing he was protecting his grandmother by getting involved. He thought he was strong enough to handle this alone, Teresa said, tears in her eyes. But he's just a child. Davi placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He's stronger than you think, and he knows you won't give up on him. We'll find him. That night, as they reviewed the maps and notes, Teresa came across something that made her pause. On one of the sheets was a rudimentary drawing of a ring with a star symbol. Next to it, Miguel had written, their symbol, false trust. This has to be important, Teresa said, holding up the drawing. Whoever is behind this network, this symbol is part of it. Davi nodded. If we find the symbol, we might be closer to finding Miguel. With their next destination in mind, they decided to leave at dawn. The rural area where the base was located seemed isolated, but it was their best lead. Teresa knew the danger was growing, but she also felt closer to Miguel than ever. Hope was the flame keeping her steady, even as she faced the unknown. The road to the rural area seemed endless. Teresa and Davi traveled in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The map found in the abandoned building guided them to a location marked simply as base, but uncertainty loomed like a shadow. The surrounding landscape was dominated by empty fields and sparse trees, creating an overwhelming sense of isolation. When they arrived, they spotted a fenced-off property. The main warehouse was an old structure, but the movement of people around it made it clear that something significant was happening there. Trucks were parked and men were unloading crates, reinforcing the notion that they were facing something big. Teresa gripped Miguel's diary tightly, now her constant companion, while Davi scanned the area with binoculars. "This is the place," he said quietly, "and it's more dangerous than we imagined." They decided to wait until nightfall to move closer. Once darkness enveloped the area, Teresa and Davi crossed the field toward the warehouse, moving carefully to avoid detection. They entered through an open side panel, where muffled voices indicated a group was gathered upstairs. Inside, the scene was a mix of chaos and organization. Stacks of stolen electronics, hidden compartments with weapons, and a table covered in documents that seemed to track transactions. Teresa's heart raced as she noticed a photo of Miguel among the papers. He was surrounded by two men who appeared to be the leaders of the group. "He's here," she whispered, clutching Davi's arm. Before they could investigate further, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Teresa and Davi quickly hid behind a stack of boxes, watching as two men walked to the table. One of them held a ring with the star symbol Miguel had drawn in his diary. He spoke with authority, clearly giving orders. "The boy needs to be transferred tonight. That old lady's drawing too much attention. If she shows up here, she won't be a problem." Teresa felt a wave of rage and fear, but Davy placed a steadying hand on her shoulder to keep her calm. They waited until the men left before resuming their search. Carefully climbing the stairs, they followed the sounds coming from above. In a locked, barred room, Teresa stopped abruptly. There was Miguel, sitting on the floor with his hands tied. "Miguel!" Her voice escaped before she could stop herself. The boy lifted his head, his eyes filling with tears as he saw her. "Grandma! You shouldn't be here!" He looked tired but unharmed. Teresa ran to him as Davi worked on unlocking the gate with his pocket knife. "I'm getting you out of here, my love," Teresa said, embracing him tightly. "It's all right now." No, but Miguel shook his head. "No, Grandma, they're here. You need to leave before—" The sound of footsteps and voices interrupted him. Teresa and Davi helped Miguel up quickly, but it was too late. Two men appeared at the doorway, their expressions a mix of shock and fury. "What are you doing here?" One of them pulled out a gun, but before he could use it, Davi lunged forward, toppling a shelf onto him. The other tried to grab Teresa, but she hit him with the diary, startling him enough to break free. They ran through the warehouse corridors, Miguel in the middle, as the men shouted and called for reinforcements. Adrenaline surged through them, but the path to the exit felt impossibly long. When they reached the open side panel they had entered through, they realized more group members had already surrounded them. "Run!" Davy shouted, creating a diversion by pushing crates toward the pursuers. Teresa and Miguel took the chance to slip away, but one of the men managed to grab Davi, dragging him to the ground. Teresa hesitated, but Davi shouted, "Get Miguel out of here! I'll catch up with you!" With tears streaming down her face, Teresa grabbed Miguel's arm and sprinted across the field. Behind them, the sounds of shouting and fighting filled the air. They reached the hidden car and climbed in hastily. Teresa started the engine with trembling hands, glancing back toward the warehouse, but there was no sign of Davi. "Will he be okay, Grandma?" Miguel asked, his voice trembling. Teresa took a deep breath, fighting back her despair. "He's strong, my love. He'll find us." As the car sped away, Teresa knew the ordeal was far from over. They were free, but now they had targets on their backs. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the cost of uncovering the truth was high. And Davi's bravery would be the key to the next step in their fight for justice and Miguel's safety. The car sped down the deserted road, the sound of the engine muffled only by Teresa and Miguel's heavy breathing. The escape from the warehouse was still fresh in their minds, and Davy's absence weighed like a shadow over them. Teresa gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. Beside her, Miguel stared out the window, his eyes reflecting fear and guilt. "Grandma, they said they'd hurt you if I didn't obey," Miguel confessed in a weak voice. Teresa glanced at him for a moment, swallowing the pain his words brought. "You did what you thought you needed to do to protect me, my love. But now, we're together, and we'll face this together." Miguel began to share what he knew. He had been approached by a group of teens at school who initially pretended to be friends. They offered him protection from the bullying he endured, but it quickly became clear there was a price to pay. "They said I had to do favors. At first it was just carrying things, you know, but then they started asking for more, and when I wanted out, that's when the threats began." As Miguel spoke, Teresa began to grasp the depth of the trap he had fallen into. This wasn't just a network of delinquent youths, it was something bigger, something organized. "That friend you mentioned in the diary, is he the leader?" Teresa asked. Miguel nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "He never gave his name, but he wore a ring with a star. He runs everything." A wave of anger and determination washed over Teresa. "We're going to end this, Miguel, I promise." When they arrived at a secluded motel, they decided to hide for a few hours to plan their next move. Teresa knew Davy had risked his life for their escape, and she had to believe he was still alive. While Miguel slept, exhausted, Teresa combed through the diary and papers they had found. A more detailed map pointed to one final location, an isolated property labeled simply as the farm. That's where they must have taken Davy, Teresa thought, her heart tightening. She gently woke Miguel and explained they had to keep moving. "This is our chance to end it, Miguel. We're going to find him." The farm sat on an expansive plot of land, surrounded by dense forest. The silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Teresa parked the car at a safe distance, and they advanced on foot. Miguel clung tightly to her hand, his steps hesitant but resolute. As they approached, they saw lights coming from a barn at the far end of the property. Voices echoed from inside, and Teresa recognized one of them. It was Davy. He was tied up, being interrogated by two men. "You can beat me all you want," he said firmly, "but I won't tell you anything. You've already lost." Teresa knew she had to act quickly. Using the darkness to their advantage, she and Miguel crept to the side of the barn. They found a secondary entrance and slipped in, moving cautiously between crates and tools. Miguel pointed to a shiny object on the ground, a cell phone that appeared to belong to one of the men. Teresa picked it up and saw it was unlocked. Within seconds, she managed to send a location message to an emergency contact. "If anything goes wrong, at least someone will know where we are," she whispered to Miguel. Moving silently, they reached the spot where Davy was tied up. The men had stepped out momentarily, and Teresa seized the opportunity to untie him. "I knew you'd come," Davy said with a weary smile. "But they're armed. We need to move fast." The trio tried to exit through the same path Teresa and Miguel had entered, but they were spotted by one of the guards. "Hey, they're here!" The shout alerted the rest of the group, plunging the barn into chaos. Teresa, Davy, and Miguel ran, but soon found themselves cornered by three men, including the leader with the star ring. "You think you'll leave here alive?" the leader sneered. Teresa stepped forward, shielding Miguel with her body. "You used a child to do your dirty work, but it ends here." The man laughed, raising a gun in her direction. Before anything worse could happen, Distant sirens pierced the night. Relief washed over Teresa. The location message had worked. Within minutes, police surrounded the barn, arresting the men. The leader tried to flee, but was caught after a brief chase. As the officers led the criminals away, Teresa held Miguel tightly. David, battered but alive, smiled with relief. "You did the impossible, Teresa. You brought Miguel back and stopped this network." Teresa looked at Miguel, wiping the tears from his face. "We did this together, and I'll never let you face something like this alone again." The morning after the operation at the farm brought a sense of relief, but also deep reflection. Miguel was safe, David was by Teresa's side, and the men responsible for the criminal network had been taken into police custody. However, the emotional scars of the experience lingered, and Teresa knew there were still unresolved questions. At the police station, Teresa gave her testimony while Miguel sat silently beside her, clutching his mother's chain, a symbol of comfort amidst the chaos. The inspector in charge of the investigation seemed impressed by Teresa and David's courage. "Thanks to you, we've dismantled a criminal operation that's been spreading through the city for years. This will save many lives." After the testimony, Teresa and Miguel returned home. The emptiness Teresa had felt over the past 3 years seemed to shift. Fear and anguish were replaced by a renewed resolve to protect Miguel and rebuild their lives together. "No matter what we face, Miguel, we'll face it together. I'll never let you carry such a heavy burden alone again," she said, holding him close. In the days that followed, the police shared details about their investigations. The leader of the organization confessed to several crimes, including an unexpected link to Teresa's past. The network was connected to the accident that had taken Amanda's life. During interrogation, it was revealed that Amanda's accident hadn't been a random tragedy. A vehicle belonging to the network had been transporting illegal goods that day. Amanda had crossed their path by chance, and the organization, fearing she might report something, caused the collision. The revelation deeply shook Teresa. The pain she had carried for years now had new meaning. Amanda wasn't merely a victim of fate, but of the cruelty and greed of a criminal group. Yet instead of leaving her paralyzed, the truth ignited something within her. "They took Amanda, but they won't take anything else from us. No more fear." Miguel, too, was changed. The experience had left its mark, but also made him more aware of his own strength and resilience. He began attending therapy sessions offered by the school, encouraged by Teresa. For the first time, he opened up about the bullying he had endured and the choices he felt forced to make to protect his grandmother. "I just didn't want her to suffer anymore," he told the therapist, while Teresa listened from afar, her heart heavy yet filled with pride. Davy, who had become an indispensable part of their lives, began visiting their home regularly. He helped Miguel with his studies and provided companionship for Teresa, who finally allowed herself to feel that she wasn't alone anymore. "Life has a way of giving us new chances," he said one evening as the three shared dinner, "and you two are proof of that." Months later, Teresa decided she needed to do more to honor Amanda and prevent other families from experiencing similar pain. She started a community initiative to support at-risk youth, offering guidance and resources. "If Miguel had the strength to overcome all this, then many others can too," she said with conviction. The bond between Teresa and Miguel grew stronger with each passing day. Miguel began to smile again, something Teresa had feared she might never see, and together they found a new sense of normalcy. On a quiet afternoon, while organizing a box of old belongings, Miguel found a photo of Amanda with Teresa and began to cry. "I miss her, Grandma." Teresa embraced him, wiping away his tears. "I do too, my love. But she lives on in us, in every choice we make and in every day we face with courage." Teresa and Miguel's story wasn't just one of survival, it was a tale of redemption and resilience. With every step, Teresa showed that a grandmother's love was an unstoppable force, capable of overcoming any adversity. They rebuilt their lives one day at a time, transforming pain into purpose and fear into hope. And so, Miguel and Teresa began writing a new chapter together, a chapter where pain did not define them, but love and courage guided them. The tragedy had left its marks, but it had also shown that even in the darkest moments, light always finds a way in. And that was the heartwarming story of Teresa and Miguel, a journey of love, courage, and resilience. If you enjoyed this narrative full of twists and turns, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. This helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire and move you. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Miguel would have made different choices if he had told his grandmother about the bullying from the start? Or could Teresa have noticed the signs earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're eager to know what you think about the characters' decisions and how the story might have unfolded differently. And remember, Teresa's courage and Miguel's resilience show that even in the toughest moments, love and determination can guide us to brighter days. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.